people from email. Great. Great. All right, with that, and I think we've got most everybody that's registered, so we'll go ahead and get started. So this is the Bluegrass Area Chapter October chapter meeting. For those of you that aren't already familiar with and are in our region, we're Lexington and surrounding, a lot of kind of central and eastern Kentucky. When we are allowed to meet live, we meet at the BCTC Community College there in Lexington. And feel free to reach out to me if you want to know more about that, and about our November meeting, which is going to be a discussion on business ethics, because all of us that are CMAs know we need to get our 2 hours of ethics CPE. But for today, this is Controllership's Next Normal, looking beyond the pandemic. So, and sorry, I've got a couple people still coming in, but I think just kind of a word, make sure you're muted. It looks like most everybody is, and so we don't disrupt Ashley when we get to the presenting. And I think that is. Yes. You should be muted, or just make sure that you are muted. If you've unmuted, whole Q&As will be at the end of the session. And if you look, there should be a on your Zoom, there should be you can pop up a chat, and I'll try to keep tabs on that during the presentation. We did have a little bit of as we were trying to coordinate the technology here. So I think I'm going to be moving the slides for Ashley, and she'll be saying, next slide, but hopefully that shouldn't be too disruptive. So, but hold questions to the end, and then now you do receive an hour of CPE credit, but you need to be here for the full presentation, answer the questions as we pop up the polls as we did earlier. And there'll be an evaluation poll at the end. This should only take a minute to run through. We do encourage that, and that helps us get a lot of good information about the these presentations and how we can best serve you as the IMA community. All right, now Ashley Gibson, advisory. This is her profile. She is a Saluki, graduate of Southern Illinois University, Carbondale, the bachelor's and a master's, if I recollect, and I believe an MBA from Texas A&M. Nagy, you picked up on some of the banter earlier. We were both at Carbondale at the same time, so we've known each other for a while now. And I could read through all this, but the short takeaway from it is Ashley is an IMA rock star. So, and as I was telling some of my students, I'm a professor here at Eastern Kentucky University. So some of my students, if you want to know somebody to model your career and professionalism on, Ashley is a great one to look to, and I especially appreciate that as she's presented at a couple of our student leadership conferences, and is always pouring into the students and helping them get their careers off on the right foot here. So, and welcome, Ashley.
Thank you so much. It's great to be live and in person with you guys.
All right, now if I can get the slide to move forward.
And while Justin's getting the slides transitioned over, I really love the fact that some of you guys are on video and hop on video. I want to make this as interactive as possible. I know this new norm is an unfortunate norm, but we can always make the best of it by at least, getting on video, being interactive, and, feel free to use the chat function throughout the presentation. And if you've got any questions, I'll kind of weave them in and out of the presentation. And then I'll obviously take Q&A at the end as well. But I'm an open book. I'm an open book both in terms of my roles within IMA as well as my career path, and then of course the topic at hand, which is talking about controllership, which is probably my favorite topic.
All right, I'm not sure why these slides decided to stop.
Well, my face broke the machine, obviously.
I'm gonna just try to see if I can just close this and relaunch. So simply my
No worries.
slideshow, current slide. There we go. And it doesn't seem to want to go beyond slide 4 here.
Can you hit escape and then try and get to slide 5 manually? And then click on that icon in the, yeah, there you go. Perfect.
Okay.
Wonderful.
All right, and I will turn it over to Ashley now that we figured out how to get beyond slide 4. 2020, everybody, 2020.
Technological glitches happen and it is a-okay. So we'll go ahead and proceed to the next slide to kind of give you guys a feel as to what the agenda will be for the session. As I think about the next normal, or the new normal, as we call it, as some folks will call it, I really break this down into 3 domains. So thinking about how work will change, how workforce will change, and then of course, a lot of folks' favorite topic, how the workplace has changed. We'll have some polling questions throughout the presentation for that CPE. And as I said, we'll take Q&A throughout as well as near the end. As we think about work, I explain this as kind of the actual work that's performed. So you think about automation itself, and which is, you know, oftentimes a favorite topic amongst my friendly friends that are around really what will work look like. And so work entails automation and transforming or changing the way of which we do work. And we can also translate that too into the workforce. What will the workforce look like? What roles will they play within controllership? And then lastly, workplace as being that physical or digital environment. Go to the next slide. And with that, we'll go ahead and open our first polling question. And as Justin's pulling that up, it's prior to March 20th, so before COVID, what percentage of your time were you working remotely? We'll give everyone a few seconds for this. You know, for me personally, you know, I don't know if you were able to hear the banter that Justin and I had earlier, but I travel to my clients. So every single week I was traveling to my clients around the US and sometimes even internationally. So I was actually traveling about 95%. So I would be in probably that 0 to 1 to 25 of actually being remote. And I would just fly around the US, and sometimes I'd go visit my family who I haven't seen since February, which is kind of unfortunate. But I know I'm not alone in this. All right, and our polling questions, look at that. 0% working remotely is the dominant polling answer. No surprise here, because quite frankly, a lot of us were familiar working in a physical office environment, whether you were traveling like myself or actually going to the office. So virtual environments are definitely a new beast that we're all trying to understand. So excellent, thanks so much for that polling question. We'll go ahead to the next slide. So today's topic, you know, as Deloitte breaks it down into thinking about the recovery efforts of the pandemic, we really break it down to 3 pillars. So respond, recover, and thrive. So respond really has kind of already taken shape as we've experienced this internationally, even prior to March. And then of course it was well known across the US in that February-March timeframe. So most businesses at this point in time are really past that respond phase, and they've more migrated into the recovery and the thrive area. So recover is really, you know, thinking about today, whereas thrive is what actions can you take now to prepare yourself for tomorrow? And by tomorrow, you know, that work, that returning back to work, and really what would that next norm look like for your organization? And we'll go to the next slide. To put COVID into perspective, I want to share a few facts with you. As Justin mentioned, you'll get this PowerPoint in PDF. So after this presentation, so no need to memorize them. There won't be a pop quiz. But I wanted to showcase a few little statistics that we have figured out or have found throughout this pandemic. A lot of these are from that March, April timeframe. So you'll probably notice that some of these have probably shifted as we've become longer and longer in this situation. I mean, I'll say, Deloitte had extended their working from home. Originally, it was, until further notice, then it was September, and then now here we are with January 4th as the tentative date. But of course, it's a moving target. And I'm sure as many of you have seen, even in your own work environments, that this is really, it has been a moving target. But what our studies have shown and what we've seen throughout this disruption, and I will call COVID-19 a few different things throughout this presentation. It's not meant to be of any offense where I'll call it pandemic disruption, black swan event, because it really has been a black swan event. But what's been different about this particular black swan event is that oftentimes black swan events are isolated to certain companies or industries. We saw that with the housing market. We saw that with banks. We saw that now, across the world. Sometimes a black swan could be something like a cyber breach. So something that, I'm sure you've seen in the news of, a couple of different retailers, perhaps, a hotel chain that experienced those cyber breaches. Those cyber breaches are technically deemed to be black swan events, but COVID-19 is definitely a black swan event, with its true differentiator being that it's globally changed all of us. It's impacted all organizations, but it's really a matter of how do you deal with the crisis? How do you deal with crisis management, which will be the true differentiator across different organizations and different companies. These statistics that I provide to you, though, are really showing the magnitude as well as some of the optimism that exists within the situation. So, I'll point out a couple of these. So, we think about 4 out of 5 workers were globally affected by COVID. Fairly reasonable of a statistic, I think, as our studies, as our polling question even showed, this is quite significant, where a majority now are working remotely, I would imagine, but previously were not. 74% of CFOs will move a portion of their workforce to permanently remote positions. This one I want you to keep, especially as we start talking a bit about the workforce later in this presentation, as well as workplace. Very interesting of a statistic. I mean, a majority of CFOs are thinking about creating those permanent virtual positions. Additionally, we're seeing an uptick of users utilizing different virtual platforms. So, me personally, I think it's about 6 or 7 different virtual platforms to conduct business with different clients. So, while we're right now using Teams, or not Teams, but Zoom, others use Teams or other different platforms. So you're definitely seeing an uptick in virtual platforms, which obviously have their own pros and cons. And then as we think about that productivity, this is this ongoing debate as to how productive are we in our work now that we are virtual. I'm sure as some of you are sitting at home with those 2-legged and 4-legged friends, your productivity be compromised by some of those individuals. But what we're seeing is that there is actual some optimism here that individuals have really felt productive during this environment. So, you'll see here 66% of employees who work in a fully enabled digital workplace reported a positive impact on their productivity. Very positive sign. Now, obviously, as I mentioned earlier, this statistic was conducted early in the pandemic, and I explained the pandemic as, a little bit of a roller coaster of emotions. So I would say the March, April timeframe, that was kind of that honeymoon phase, a little bit of uncertainty of what would happen, but a bit of enjoyment that you were experiencing being at home. but then maybe the reality of, I don't know when my kids will go to summer camp, which then turned into, well, at least they'll go to school, which then turned into virtual work environments or virtual learning for their students, or for their children. So, things have kind of evolved as we've gone through the pandemic, month by month, with its own fair set of challenges that could perhaps compromise that productivity. We'll go to the next slide. Deloitte also highlights what is called controllership in the green. So this is what we utilize in terms of talking about the overarching theme of controllership, of what sits within controllership normally. Now, this is a example of a controllership organization. So naturally, there could be things that reside within your controllership organization that may or may not be on the list, but this is kind of what we normally see. But this really, what we utilize this for is really to talk about financial health, business growth, sustainability, and includes various leading practices to enable profitability, expansion, and even workforce evolution. You'll see a couple of different things to direct your attention. You'll see that primary tree, which really focuses on processes and activities, whereas you'll see that little tiny smaller tree, or almost a sapling, and that is more for episodical or transactional events. So think of that as in M&A activities. And then lastly, I'll touch upon the 4 enabling areas, which you'll see in each of your different corners or quadrants here. And these are really focused on enabling areas that help drive controllership. So we'll think about it in the sense of technology, data analytics, governance and compliance, which tends to be many people's favorite topic, and then delivery model. So, as we kind of think about, I show this slide primarily because as you think about the different areas within controllership and as it relates to work and workforce predominantly, think about the areas of which being more remote could be more advantageous. So, I put this in here, especially as you get your PDF, that you kind of think through this as well. Go to the next slide. Then we'll go into another polling question. What has been the most challenging activity for your controllership function during COVID-19? And I will say we've used these polling questions for a couple of presentations, and I'm always surprised at the results here, that it usually ends up being pretty much of a split across. So there's nothing really that typically wins, but we'll find out with the polling results.
I got 10 more seconds here.
All right. And for those of you that have already completed your polling question, if you'd like to, feel free to utilize that chat function to provide any questions that you specifically have as it relates to workforce and workplace. And I'll be more than happy to integrate that in as we talk through different pieces.
All right.
All right, and the results, as expected, pretty much across the board, fairly even. A little bit about engaging the digital workforce. So that's a good heads up, because we've had a lot of conversation, a lot of feedback on presentations that have really been pertaining to how do you keep the digital workforce engaged? How do you ensure burnout doesn't exist? I often coin the term, am I working from home or working, how do I say it? Now that I've said it out loud, am I working from home, or am I am I at home working, basically? So is my home my work, or am I, or am I just, turning my home into an office, or is my office becoming my home, is really the notion here. because are there boundaries that exist? And, you know, how do you establish those boundaries even with your leaders and with your superiors who you report to? How do you establish those boundaries to ensure that you do have that work-life balance? And does work-life balance look differently now in a virtual environment? So that's great feedback. We'll go to the next slide. All right, once again, a lot of text on the slide, but enough information for when you get this as a PDF that you can really process the information. We'll shift gears into talking about the future of work, and I want to highlight a few things on the slide to really be thinking about. But, you know, really as we think about work and how it's going to change, you know, we've got this notion of this 24/7 virtual delivery model that will really be transforming the way that we do work. And this goes into the notion of having more standardized processes in place, and this feeds into automation. So, you know, I frequently talk about the fact that data drives a lot of how you conduct your work. So if your data is garbage in, garbage out, oftentimes your professionals are going to be sitting there massaging data. There might be multiple sources of the truth, and you're going to have to try and get them all to be singing the same song. And so you're going to have to massage that data until you get it correct. Well, when you take data out of the system and massage the data, suddenly numbers become a bit mucky, and you start trying to figure out what exactly is the right number, what's the correct source of truth, and it becomes very challenging. So as we think about what the future of work will look like, we have to start thinking about how we can best utilize automation to develop really that 24/7 delivery model, which would incorporate the use of technology as opposed to a human working 24/7. So for those of you that may be feeling that 24/7 burnout or emails that come in at the late hours of the day, you might be sitting there nodding your head and really agreeing to that notion. But that's really been a challenge when we think about this virtual environment. Is this always on? So sometimes I really dislike saying the 24/7 virtual delivery model, because it almost gives off this vibe that everyone will be working 24/7. But if you utilize technology in the right way, then this always on notion can be always on with technology. You can utilize things like chat bots that can assist different areas of the business whenever, wherever. You know, I remember back in my travel days, you know, prior to March, staying at the W, and the W would, you know, they had this slogan that said whenever, wherever. And it reminds me so much of a 24/7 delivery model. But yet if you utilize technology accordingly, then, you know, you don't have staff that are always on 24/7. Additionally, you know, as we think about creating something that, quite frankly, is beautiful with automation. So let's say you have structured data and you're able to utilize automation effectively. That, of course, will lead to great benefits. So, you know, we think about the efficiencies that will exist within the controllership function or the finance organization. And what that drives then is those individuals to be able to focus on other things. So that kind of touches upon how workforce is going to be impacted in this. Additionally, cost optimization. So a frequent question that we get is, if I implement automation, that means I'm cutting people. And I emphasize that that's not exactly the truth. Instead, you have overloaded finance professionals that aren't able to do value-added responsibilities in their role. So when you free up their time in not doing tactical day in, day out operational grind, they're able to step aside from the numbers, and they're able to look at everything in a holistic picture. and be the storytellers that really finance and accounting professionals were born to be. You know, that's why we have certifications like this, the CMA, where as you think about being an elevated finance professional, you're able to derive business insights and intelligence off the numbers. So cost optimization is really an argument that I would say doesn't necessarily is, you know, it's, yes, it's a benefit, but you're not cutting individuals. You're saving time in those more non-value add or low value add activities to really elevate the individual to provide more value and more insight. Additionally, agility and better business partnering. So organizations, and we've seen it with a lot of our different clients, is that organizations that were already up to speed on various pieces of technology were able to pivot and think about alternative ways of whether it's how do we conduct business with customers, how do we strategically project our numbers based on, you know, this isolated situation, and also how can we really elevate our finance professionals to think about how do they, you know, get out of the office. I mean, you know, I know a lot of organizations, including perhaps some that you're a part of, you know, with a flick of a light switch from being physically in person to in a virtual environment. So having the agility to really pivot in those different ways, I think is really critical. And data, having strong data, having automation, having appropriate standardized processes in place can enable to be that agile. You know, I also will cover here too on the better business partnering. You know, if I am a professional that is able to get out of the weeds and be able to provide more value-added insight and analysis, then in theory, my stakeholders will be a lot happier. Your stakeholders need various pieces of information, you know, such as tax, maybe HR, FP&A. And, you know, even as we think about FP&A, and, you know, some organizations have FP&A within finance, some have it outside. So, you know, whichever way your organization prefers this approach, the reality to it is that FP&A is really going through a struggle right now because the numbers are not articulating what really the future will look like. And I'll give a few examples. So let's say, for instance, you are a retailer, and, you know, I'll call it the winners and losers of COVID. And winners and losers, I know, is a very terrible word choice, but as we think about it, some organizations have really profited from COVID, and some have, you know, substantially lost a lot of money and are in theory filing for bankruptcy. You're seeing a lot of sales, especially in the consumer products domain, that are selling off their inventory because they've got such excess inventory sitting in their warehouses, sitting in buildings that perhaps may or may not be open. And even if they're open, they're at partial occupancy. So they're definitely not seeing the influx of customers. But you do have kind of these winners and losers. So let's take, for instance, you know, a winner in this, which I would say is, you know, someone like Home Depot that does home office or home improvements. Do you honestly think that now versus 6 months from now, when hopefully we are, you know, out of the pandemic, but do you honestly think that more individuals will want to be doing home improvement projects? Probably not. So the numbers are not telling the true story. You look at hotels and hospitality right now, you know, they're sitting at lower than 50% occupancy. But once we experience that next normal, what is that occupancy going to look like? And see, having individuals such as the CMAs of the world, the CSCAs of the world, to be able to articulate what it is beyond the numbers and beyond the pandemic are really going to help shape a more agile finance organization that can serve as a better business partner to the entire organization. And then in theory, this generates really that competitive advantage. So if the finance organization is, you know, this cutting edge or, you know, leading organization within the organization itself, more individuals will go to that group. They'll and they'll want to, have them as a business partner. So it's breaking down those silos. And it all starts by ensuring that we utilize technology for our advantage to upskill our individuals. And with that, we'll go to the next slide. All right. With our polling question, post-COVID-19, what skill set would you focus on most when hiring within your controllership function? It looks like we've got a couple of polling questions within the chat. So while you guys are answering that polling question, I'm going to read these. There's a question here that says, what needed leadership skills for controllers are rising to the top during this time of COVID? Fantastic question. And I think I touched upon a little bit of it. This polling question, talks a little bit about it in terms of post-COVID-19, but, I really think it's, from what I'm experiencing, it's being able to understand beyond the numbers, but it's also having that technological acumen to understand how to use that technology effectively. So thank you for the question, Nancy.
Yeah, give about 10 more seconds for the last couple of people to respond.
Cool. Sounds great.
And we'll close it up here.
Awesome.
And we share our results.
It looks like data visualization and storytelling. Yeah, this one doesn't surprise me as being high. I'm actually surprised at how high it is. We normally see it a little bit higher than the others, business partnering, usually trailing shortly thereafter, because really that being that storyteller and understanding the visuals behind the data, being able to identify those anomalies and whatnot, it helps in becoming that better business partner. So great insights there, but definitely needing to know those anomalies. That's going to be critical as we look at forecasting and projections coming out of COVID.
Might have been skewed just a little bit. Our September meeting actually was a data visualization topic.
There we go. So now the truth comes out. I see how it is.
Yeah, it is.
We'll go ahead to the next slide, Justin. All right, so we're going to shift our focus into workforce. And as you would imagine, as I alluded to at the beginning, workforce, and workplace are very interconnected. So if you utilize technology and it changes the way that work is performed, and Nancy, what a great segue of this question of what skill sets rise to the top of what do we need for our controllers to be elevated. But if you have that automation and you're elevating your finance and accounting professionals to think more critically and to be providing that great analysis to their stakeholders, then obviously you're going to need different skills for that. So instead of perhaps doing account reconciliations every day, all day long, instead you're going to be looking at what's the frequency of journal entries, and are there journal entries that are popping in that are abnormal in abnormal periods of time. I've looked at several Tableau reports for clients where they look at journal entries and where the influx happens throughout the month or throughout the quarter. And that helps them in determining, different time periods for their employees, as well as, where are there opportunities for them to perhaps do some of the entries prior to an influx. So, it's just fun fact there, but, thinking about those top skills. So tech savvy is a critical topic here. As we think about all the different platforms of automation. There's oodles out there of different possibilities of what you could integrate. I would, it'd be unfortunate for me not to mention that, yesterday I did a presentation with Workiva for IMA about the opportunities that Workiva has in order to automate different areas and to be able to, generate various SEC reporting, internal statutory requirements, et cetera. So being tech savvy in certain things like Workiva is critical to where you can help your organization be more agile in optimizing the use of those particular technologies. ERP. So what's really interesting with ERPs is, and we're actually seeing an influx in ERP implementations recently. I'm sure some are probably shaking their heads of, especially those that have already gone through ERP implementations historically, of ERP implementations are hard enough as it is in person, let alone in a virtual environment. And I actually had a client of mine that just finished their ERP implementation and started it basically the first day that lockdown happened and launched on 9/1. So ERP implementations can happen during COVID, but definitely having this knowledge of how to improve your ERP is really critical, how to optimize it, and what best is used as far as technology enablers when we think about bolt-ons to ERPs. So, like for instance, if you have, let's say, SAP, and bolting on things like Workiva or Blackline, how you can have an interconnected end-to-end cloud-based solution. But we're actually seeing that influx of ERPs though, because now that we're in a digital, in this digital space or this work environment that's digital, it's becoming more and more acknowledgeable by finance and accounting professionals that frankly, the systems are garbage and in some cases, and need to be overhauled, need to be repaired, because it's taking employees tremendously more time. And now more than ever, time is of value. Time is of essence. So it's no longer, well, it's okay for you to sit in your office, but now it's intruding on my family time. So ERPs are now becoming really popular though to implement, because we got to fix that data infrastructure, standardize it, so that we can then implement technology on top of it to have that end-to-end cloud-based solutioning. You'll also see other pieces on here, such as project management. So, critical when we think about technology implementations, of being able to have that project management skill, data analytics and visualization. We talked about that in that polling question, business partnering, and then communication and collaboration. So when we're in this virtual environment, being able to communicate virtually has become extremely difficult. And being able to communicate both verbally and in writing, and watching how you portray yourself in, say, an email, is becoming more and more important because of the fact that we are in a virtual environment. And as we saw in those statistics where 74% of CFOs are thinking about making permanently virtual positions, communication is going to be one of those that's going to be a very interesting piece as we continue down this path. We talk a little bit about, what does the future accountant look like? So we think about those skill sets, and we think about what's that next generation of accountant, or what does that next generation of controllership look like? And it's really, as I've touched upon, being that trusted business provider that can provide strategy, provide advice, provide that insight that really your business partners are looking for. It's amazing. I've done quite a bit of different transformation projects over the years with different clients. And I've had the opportunity and pleasure of interviewing different stakeholders. So let's say like the lead of HR or the lead of tax, and have asked them, how strong of a business partner do you think that controllership is to your organization? And it's amazing when you start breaking down those barriers. Oftentimes a critical pain point is that operating in silos. But because technology is more inclusive and you have this interconnectivity, you are encouraged to really break down those silos. And by just starting the dialogue, such as, a person like me having these interviews, really opens the minds of those opportunities or those possibilities, the art of the possible, really, of what could happen in a finance organization. And then, we talked about potential benefits in work. So similar opportunities here when it comes to workforce, where frankly, you do more with less. So you're able to accomplish a heck of a lot more with the resources and capabilities that you have. You can operate a more lean ship. And, you know, I have many clients that give me horror stories of the fact that they have, you know, 2 resources devoted nonstop on reconciliation. And, you know, you can change that easily. But you don't have to get rid of them. You can retrain them. You can make them do other more value-added things throughout the business. We'll go to the next slide. All right, so additional, you know, workforce content here. So, you know, it's obviously transforming that 8 to 5 cubicle model. There's some really interesting pieces here. As I said before, you're going to get this in PDF. So it's that streamlined process. But what I'd like to touch upon here that's really interesting is shifting that talent model. So workforce is really of what does the talent model look like? So you can really, you know, shift how you exercise your talent model. So this could be anywhere from offshore resourcing. So you could utilize more or less offshore resources in utilizing more technological capabilities. I've seen a lot of organizations where they've actually had the ability to reduce their offshore resources because some of the offshore resources were doing some of that lower value transactional type activity that automation could do. Also alternative staffing models. So if you're able to see, as my prior example noted, of where the influx and journal entry transactions are, you can kind of plan that activity and, you know, have an alternative staffing model or even seasonal talent models to help in that regard, or as needed, which translates more into that whole gig-based or on-call resources. And then also those traditional contractors or consultants that I'm sure you've utilized in the past. As you look ahead, though, I want to leave you with some final thoughts on workforce, and that's really thinking about flexibility. So, you know, you can easily empathize with individuals that sit within your finance organization, that they have probably not taken a vacation. If they did, it was probably a staycation. So, you know, they're going to be wanting vacations. They're going to be wanting to go and spend time with family that they haven't seen. So they're going to want to travel. And, you know, you've got to be able to acknowledge that the next norm is going to be filled with needing to be flexible. You know, you've got these, you know, a lot of folks have adopted during COVID. So you've got these 4-legged friends that suddenly, you know, are not going to see you every single day, every single hour that you work. So perhaps you're going to need to alter your work schedule to where, you know, maybe you're home half the day, or maybe you're home, you know, Monday and Wednesday, but you're in the office Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, or, you know, some sort of, you know, flexible work environment, as well as that flexible work setting. Then additionally, you know, PTO schedules. So we've seen a lot from our tech companies, especially on the West Coast, where we're seeing this unlimited PTO. So I would imagine, and I don't have a crystal ball, or else I'd give you guys some lottery numbers for tonight's pickings. But, you know, the interesting piece here is that people are going to want additional PTO, and, you know, unlimited PTO is something that a lot of those tech companies are already starting to utilize. So I'm guessing that this trend will continue as we see, you know, a lot of different organizations taking some of these gold standards that a lot of our tech companies have implemented. Additionally, upgraded technology or different technology that enables employees to work virtually. And then of course, my favorite, which is this casual office attire. So what will your physical attire look like when you go into the office? You know, for those that perhaps have gained some weight, it may be, I really hope that leggings and sweatpants are the future, and that we go a little more casual, especially those businesses that, you know, we've traditionally seen in you know, especially the insurance or financial services organizations where we've seen a lot of suit and ties, that may become a little more casual as we see into the future. And with that, we'll go to the next slide. To our fourth polling question. In the next normal, what percentage of your time would you like to remain working remotely? I always find this to be a very interesting question. And I've gotten a mixed grab bag of responses. You know, as I think about this question myself, you know, I miss traveling. I miss seeing my family. So I would probably be in that 1 to 25% category. I would love to get back to traveling, but I'm probably not the majority on that. Would be my guess.
Yeah, we have about another 10 seconds or so for the last couple of people.
Awesome. We got a comment in the chat. So thanks, Sandy. I started going back 2 days a week now, which I am actually shocked to see that. I'm a little shocked, and I applaud you on that because we've started seeing some, you know, more spikes in cases, especially in certain states. And I'm pretty impressed about that. We've traditionally seen, you know, as we start segueing now into workplace, that interestingly enough, finance and accounting professionals tend to be in later phases. So in the phase 4s or phase 5s, that it's more the customer service and other necessities that have been going in first. So I'm impressed that you're back. Yeah, I'm shocked too. Wish I didn't have to. I agree with you, Sandy. All right, so our polling results, that is like the most beautiful bell curve I think I've ever seen, with minimal standard deviation. Let's see, 32% say 26 to 50%, with 26 split on 1 to 25 and 51 to 75. No surprise here. You know, I think it's going to end up where a lot of folks want that hybrid model. They want that capability to, you know, it's amazing what you can do when you're at home and you're working, you know, between calls, you can, you know, walk the dog, you can, check on things, you can do laundry even. It's amazing what you can do when you're remote and working at the same time. Says 100. I'm sorry, go ahead, Justin.
I wonder what the split of those of us that have kids versus don't have kids.
Oh, I know, right? What I would give to see a bifurcation of this data. Sam says 100% remote since mid-March. Yeah, that's pretty standard, I would say, across a lot of us. And Kim says our company has gone back 2 to 3 days a week. I'm curious, Kim, and feel free to type to me in the chat if you're included in that, or if you're in an upcoming wave. And with that, we'll go to the next slide. Wow, you were included. Yikes. I'm telling you, I don't envy those that are going back. And proper safety protocols are in place, and I'll touch upon those here shortly. But, you know, and I know we're running a little short on time, so I won't give you too many of these stats, but more stats really on showing you the level of confidence, as well as, you know, predicting the whole going back remotely versus working from home. I mean, you look at that future outlook, 41% are predicted to work remotely at least some of the time during the pandemic. So that's really interesting considering our beautiful bell curve that we had. But then we look at those two statistics up above, which I think are really thought-provoking, which is 3 in 4 CFOs plan to shift at least 5% of previously on-site to permanently remote, but then 1 in 4 plan to shift at least 20%. So, and these of course were taken early in the pandemic, so that March, April timeframe. So I would even be curious to see if this is actually going to get larger as we continue to experience the pandemic. And we really start to see, though, that we can do things in a virtual environment. We'll go to the next slide. So, this is probably one of my, favorite slides, talking a little bit about the history of the workplace. So we think about, as we started, I would even date this back to the 80s, where we've had a cubicle work environment, and then the personal computer really shifted how work was performed to where you could work in cubicles, and then the exchange of emails. So it wasn't necessarily a, here's here's a piece of paper that I hand wrote everything on. Instead, it's here's a typed thing that I need you to sign, to email of here, sign this digitally, and of course faxes as well. But then we shifted, and I said earlier that tech companies have really helped us in moving the needle on progress for change as it relates to work, workforce, and workplace. And even in the workplace, we've seen it too, where they really helped us shift in the sense of cubicles to more open space environments. So this more collaborative, open environments that we've seen and probably experienced in a lot of our work environments. And then now it's going to be this question of what will the future look like? So will we have these plastic partitions between computer stations, or will we be alone, or maybe even just working remotely? But I think, going back to all these stats that I've been showing, is it goes back to the notion of you've got to find the optimal approach of who should go back to work, who should be remote, and then who can and should work from home. And, also weighing in the notion of what do employees want to be better. On a recent debrief that we did in August, we had a great speaker who's actually a board member of IMA, and she mentioned that a lot of challenges that her company has been having is level of engagement, as well as thinking about compensation and evaluations. So if you're evaluated on different skills, such as, executive presence, how do you measure executive presence over email and Zoom, or other virtual collaboration spaces? What does that mean? And how is that appropriately evaluated? Same too with if you divide your workforce across individuals that are working from home completely, partially, or entirely in the office, do opportunities change? So are you going to default to those individuals that are there in the office for opportunities? Or are you going to solicit for anyone to assist you on those? And then too, in performance evaluations, will performance evaluations be a little bit more conservative on those that physically went back to work and risked their health? Or how is that going to play out in terms of compensation? I think that's an interesting piece here that really has got to be considered and investigated further as we think about returning back to the work environment and that combination of working environments. We'll go to the next slide. To our fifth polling question. Where do you anticipate, following COVID, the controllership function prioritizing its transformational efforts?
Right. Just give it about 10 more seconds.
I'm actually really excited to see this one, given we had a bell curve the last time.
I think we're close to that here.
Yeah.
And we will end that, and we'll share it.
Ah. You guys are hung up on visualizations. Low percentage on M&A, which is kind of surprising to me. We've actually seen an uptick in that. I compare this to 2016. We're in a political election here, so 2016 versus 2020. 2016, we saw a decrease in M&A activity until the president was determined. And then once the election was over, we saw that uptick back in M&A activity. 2020 is interesting because, well, it's 2020. One, you have a presidential election, so I can see, yes, the decrease in M&A activity, but then also too, you have all these different companies that are filing for bankruptcy, filing for restructuring, having, challenges in performance. And I'm telling you, it is like a shark infested water. There's a lot of M&A activity that's really been boiling, just because, when you've got competitors or, different companies that you've been eyeing that are really experiencing some challenging times due to not so strong of a balance sheet, it's an opportune time to take that opportunity. And with that, we'll go to the next slide. So these, especially for those that maybe are returning, so those Kims and Sandys of the world, or those that are considering returning, I leave you these food for thoughts, which is, areas to consider as you're returning back. So, one, you've got to think about, that long-term strategy of, when and in what order do you bring individuals back? So this goes back to the whole phased approach, and how do you relay or how do you communicate that, which goes into the second point of how do you clearly communicate how you're going to do it, what health protocols are in place to basically help in giving the trust of the employee that it's going to be okay to return to work. And then you've obviously got to do some structural things in order to make the workplace perhaps a little bit more prepared for individuals returning back to work, whether it's those plastic partitions, different PPE, having stands for hand sanitizer, bathroom doors, etc. Health and safety, which goes into that PPE, is making sure that, individuals feel healthy and safe when they go back to work, that they do have that appropriate cleansing and hand sanitizer, and, what are you going to do with bathroom doorknobs and whatnot to make folks feel safe. And then last but not least, government rules and incentives. So making sure that you're in alignment with government entities on following protocols of returning back to work. We'll go to the next slides, Justin. So final slide, final food for thought here, really as you think about how to thrive in this environment. And I hope that this information has really helped you in opening your eyes to of, what the future will hold in the next norm. But, as you enter this next norm, you've got to really start thinking about and being creative to reimagine the art of the possible of what could the future of work look like to help build your workforce and your workplace. When you do have this reimagination, you've also got to be able to compose an appropriate and optimal workforce and workplace environment that generates that value and finding that good balance with automation as well as your people. And then lastly, this activate, which is, really thinking about what's the best way to retain and attain your employees, and how do you make sure that your organization as well as outside the organization know that your controllership or finance function is really that world-class organization that allows individuals to be challenged and to provide that insight to where you're not doing those tactical day-to-day responsibilities, but thinking through how you appropriately attain those employees and create an effective work environment that hopefully we all will know to love in this next norm. And with that, I know that we have hit the hour, but I'm more than happy to stay on for some Q&A.
All right, so I guess I'm unmuted. So if you have some questions, put them in the chat box and we'll take a few minutes for that.
And there's my contact information. Feel free to add me on. I post some pretty interesting thoughtware as well as different presentations on LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out to me over email, and would love to have more conversations. How do we monitor FLSA compliance for remote employees? I'll touch a little bit on just generic compliance. I think utilizing technology for compliance is crucial. You've got to find ways of which to use technology for your advantage, and areas of which include compliance.
Well, we're getting some questions. I'll pitch one to you, Ashley, that
Great.
as you were speaking, I'll set it up here. As I've seen kind of workforce of the future presentations before, one of the things that keeps coming up is that this idea of a career is different now. Instead of like, okay, we go into being an accountant and we're going to have a fairly linear career path, that it's almost like surfing, like you catch a wave and you ride it for a few years and then you got to catch a different wave. Do you see that kind of the COVID, as you talk to companies, has sort of brought some of that into the business model, that, you know, you've got to think differently about what you are as a business, and what you are now is probably going to be different than what you're going to be 5 years from now or 10 years from now?
Yeah, so I'll answer that in a bit of a unique way. As I mentioned before, COVID is a black swan event. However, it's been a catalytic event to digitization and going on a digital transformation. So I would say that post-COVID, or even, as we're still going through COVID, there are finance organizations that are really having that open dialogue and are pushing now more than ever to automate technology or utilize technology for automation, because they acknowledge the fact that, we've got to get out of the weeds. It's becoming more and more noticeable because you're relying on individuals to relay messages over email instead of chats instead of physically in person and whatnot. So I would say it's really encouraged or pushed that digitization. What I'll also say too is that, and we've seen it at the university levels, is that there's been an influx of different degree programs in things like Masters of Data Analytics, or even business organizations or business, like College of Businesses, that have brought in technology. So technology has perhaps sat in things like engineering in some universities, as well as liberal arts. And instead they're moving it out of those areas of the university or colleges and moving it into business, so that they can have this good marriage of business information systems. It's interesting. I mean, when we were in college together, men, we had different, information systems classes, but do we use those same technologies that we learned in that class now? Absolutely not. Now, those skill sets that you learned still are translatable. So kind of like when you say, oh, well, I didn't learn anything in grade school. Well, yeah, you did. You learned 2 + 2 is 4. Well, you needed that, in order to, appropriately do a journal entry. You build upon your skills is the point of that. So I think really, as we think about technology, even in the educational setting, regardless of the technology that you learn fundamental skill sets. But with that said, there are some cool technologies out there that I don't think are going anywhere. And in fact, I would dare say that technologies like Workiva are only just going to just boom. So I think getting familiar with various technologies that are on the forefront, and Gartner, Forrester, both very great insights on those front runners in technology, will help you in figuring out what technology you should become more familiar with. And this goes back to that notion of that great marriage between data analytics and data science.
Yeah. I think we're all as accountants going to be doing some more coding and analytics, but I think that's cool because we bring in the business understanding that maybe some of your data scientists, data engineers don't always bring to that. But
yeah, I mean, we really have a unique opportunity in the business world to drive change, and it's not just being a part of the change. Like, let's be very specific on our words. You have the opportunity to drive that change, to be on the forefront of that change. And I said at the beginning, but having your CMA, having your CSCA really help.
Okay, I think we may have lost Ashley there, but I went ahead and launched the evaluation. So I'll let everybody have a minute or two to complete that, and we appreciate those that do complete that. And hopefully Ashley will be back in a minute to finish her thought. And if not, we'll go ahead and wrap this up. And I encourage everybody, our November chapter meeting is going to be the 12th, where we have a Roger Ward presenting on business ethics. And it will be a great discussion, and I think especially business ethics in light of in COVID. And I'll try to get more information out to the chapter and everyone about that going as we get closer.
Sorry about that. My good old technology, my Wi-Fi dropped on us. Were there any questions, Justin, in the chat? Sorry, I got disconnected there for minutes.
Yeah, I don't see anything we didn't already answer. So
all right.
I think everybody's completing the evaluation. And we got a lot of thank yous, but with that, I will say thank you, Ashley, for an engaging and enlightening presentation. And feel free, if you want to, if you have time, I know you're busy, but you're welcome to join us for our business ethics discussion in November. But, so with that,
I'm delighted to see, chapters such as yourself doing virtual sessions during the pandemic. And, I hope that everyone is healthy and safe and doing well. Feel free to reach out to me if you've got any questions whatsoever about IMA or around the topic that we discussed.
All right. With that, I think everybody's completed the evaluation. So I will, let me see if we had a couple of,
excellent.
Yeah, and with that, all right. So thank you, everyone. And we'll go ahead and end this. And I've got a baseball game to get to.
All right. We'll play ball.
Thank you. All right. Thanks, everyone. I will see
Cheers.
you in November.